Okay, so this is what my windowsills looked like when the drywall and painters had come through. What you're seeing here is that my building is a pole building, and it's created using a very large 8x6 posts. And if I did not want those posts to show on my interior walls, which I did not, what the framer had to do is he had to come in and create a second layer of framing on the inside that would basically thicken my walls, make my walls thick enough to hide those 8-inch wide posts. So that's why my walls are super thick. It's not an insulation thing, although they are full of insulation and they've got more than what's required because there's all that extra space. So what you're seeing here is the outside framing, which is right underneath the window. And then you're seeing some insulation, and then you're seeing part of the inside framing. And my job was, I could have, of course, had this just framed over, so it would be drywall on top, but I wanted something more special, so I decided to go with wood, which I originally did myself, and instead my friend Don, who's got access to some really nice reclaimed cedar, he started helping me build windowsills for this. So this is what it looks like with the windowsill off of it. Now this is the same windowsill with the cedar, reclaimed cedar that my friend Don cut out for me. Every window in my place is a different size. They're very slightly different. But the point is that they're different, so each one had to be cut exactly to fit. It required lots of up and down the stairs, which I don't think Don was too happy about. So this wood was originally a power pole running from the Rocky Reach Dam to elsewhere. And back in either 2010 or 2011, there was a brush fire in the area, and that damaged the posts. So they took them down, they replaced them with metal ones, and for a while these wooden posts just sat around. And Don managed to get his hands on a bunch of them. And then he brought them to a friend of his who was able to cut them into planks. So what we had originally before Don cut it was a cedar plank with a raw edge on both sides. It's probably, I don't know, here's my fingers, maybe 2 inches thick. And what Don did was he created a template at the window with using some cardboard. And then he brought that down and he cut out the rough outline of the wood, brought it back up, fine-tuned it, cut it again, a few more times, whatever. And this is what he left me with. Now, he also showed me how to finish the raw edges, which I still have to do on this, and how to sand the surface. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull this back off the windowsill area, and I'm going to bring it downstairs into my shop. And I'm going to work on the live edge first. I've got a special tool to do that with. And then I'm going to sand the whole thing down. And when you next see it up here, it will look like a completely different piece of wood. And I just want to document that whole process. So let's get to it. Okay, so we're down in my shop now, and I just want to take a moment to show you what the wood looked like when it came in. This is an example of one of the planks, and you can see that it has live edges on both sides. It's pretty beat up in some places. And also a lot of the wood, because it sat here for so long, he dropped it off last autumn and it basically sat to dry in my garage. It started to crack, to split lengthwise. So what we had to do on a lot of these pieces is we had to start off by repairing the cracks. And that's what you see over here. Don uses, believe it or not, Gorilla Glue with water. The water is the catalyst. And when he applies that between the cracks and pushes them together with clamps, it makes it basically stronger than it was without the Gorilla Glue, which is pretty cool. And we didn't have to fix all the cracks. Like here's another one here, but it doesn't go all the way through. And actually, I'm not even sure this piece of wood is going to be used because I think he's cut out all the windowsills. Actually, there's one more for him to do. So this is one, and then there's another spare one below. This is a wider one. Okay, and then this one here is one that he cut, And then after he cut it, we realized that we had a split in the front on the live edge. And even though a lot of that's going to get cut away, we wanted to repair that split ahead of time. So I did the repair on that and I glued it, and this little piece of wood is partially from the clamp and I've got to remove that. So there's some work that needs to be done on that. Okay. Okay, so I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see me do this, but I'm going to start working on this edge. I got to make sure I know which side is the top and the bottom. This is the top, that's the bottom. And then what I do is I just scrape away at it. Big chunks come off, that's okay. Put my glasses on so I can see what I'm doing. So what I want to do is take off any bark or dark areas to let the real color of the wood show through. And this is just a rough job because I want to sand it afterwards. And it doesn't really matter how perfectly I do it because it's all going to get sanded down anyway, and I want it to look kind of irregular. I don't want it to look like a piece of lumber. If I wanted to look like a piece of lumber, I would have just bought a piece of lumber, which is actually what I originally did. So, I don't know if you could see all this, but this, I just basically what I do. It's a lot easier to do with two hands. It's also a lot easier to position the wood a little bit more sturdy. Usually I tuck it under my arm. There's a knot here I got to cut off, so that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. But you get the idea. And I do that for the whole piece. Okay, so I have gone away and come back and then finished the edges on this wood. We're looking at the bottom right now and the outer edge, which I've carved away. And I did want to leave some of the knots there. Some of them will get sanded out. And this is all done by carving, manually carving the wood away. And here's the other side. Whoops, my finger there. So what I'm going to do next is use my sander to sand off the little bit on the bottom, not the very far bottom here because that's going to get glued down to the windowsill, but over here because I'll put a little bit of oil on it. And then of course the whole edge. Sand that down, and then I'll take it off the clamps that are holding it in place, and I'll sand down the top. Okay, just want to take another minute to show the edge. This is the edge I carved off. It had a lot of rough parts, and I've smoothed it down a bit with an orbital sander. I use an 80 grit sanding paper. This is the outer edge of the windowsill, and then to make these rounded edges on the end here, again I use the sandpaper for that. Looks like I can do a little bit more on this side. I haven't done the top yet. So far I've just done this outer edge. Here's the other end. I think I carved it out pretty well. Nice and rounded. So now I'm going to turn it right side up, and I'm going to sand the top. Before I get started, I just want to show you the top again. It's very rough surface. This is from the sawmill. They cut it into planks. So it's very, very rough. I'm using 80 grit sandpaper in an orbital sander. I do have a sander, belt sander. However, my belt sander, it's just a little bit too powerful for me, and it keeps trying to get away. And I keep making big grooves. So I'll use the orbital, and it'll go through a couple of discs, but that's fine. You got to use the tools that you're comfortable with to do the right job. Okay, so I hit a bit of a roadblock here. After sanding down the edge over here, I realized that this area here is, it just gives. It shouldn't give. And that's because there's a crack. You can't miss the crack. And the crack would be okay, except that I don't like the way it gives. So what I need to do is I need to open up that crack a tiny bit, get some glue in there, clamp it down, and let it set overnight. And that'll close up the crack. Then I've got to refinish this edge a tiny bit and get on with it. So this one's going to need a little bit of a detour. In the meantime, here's the rough sand, and it's not quite there yet, although it's pretty good, but you can still see some roughness in it. And I'm going to change tomorrow after the glue sets, I'm going to change the pad on the orbital sander, so with a fresh pad I'll finish this off. So that's it. Okay, so yesterday I did a lot of the trimming on this piece and most of the sanding, and while I was doing that I realized that there was a crack that I really didn't like the looks of it. It was kind of, it looked to me like I could catch clothes on it or something when I walked by. So I glued it, and we used Gorilla Glue. You wet the surface down and then you get that glue in the crack, and then it expands and gets foamy and looks like this. And it's pretty hard, it's not going anywhere. What I have to do now is cut this off and re-sand it, and hopefully when I'm done it'll be nice and firm and I can finish this piece up and install it. So that's next on my agenda for this piece. Okay, so this is that kitchen windowsill, all sanded down and ready to go. Again, I carved off the live edge, hand carved it off with a tool, and then I sanded the whole top of the board and the live edge of the board to round it out. It's all done with hand tool and sander, and made these nice rounded edges for the corners. And there is some places where you can see the glue, but I think that's gonna not be so bad once it's stained. And then of course there was some glue over here as well. And again, I don't think that that's going to really be noticeable once it gets stained. So the next step is to bring this upstairs and put it into place on the windowsill. So that's next. Okay, this is the windowsill where the windowsill wood that I just finished is going to go. And the way we've decided to put these in place is to use glue, basically. So we've got Gorilla Glue, and that works with water. So I need to start off by spraying down the surface with water. Obviously I don't want to spray where my insulation is because nothing's going to stick there, but give a good healthy coat of water. It's just a spray bottle with water in it. Nothing special. And then I need to prep the bottom of the windowsill the same way. So I'm going to turn this upside down on my kitchen counter. Oh boy. Now this is the rough side. Doesn't really show. This particular piece has a groove in it, and I think it'll just add personality to the wood. This is going to be on the bottom, so it's really not going to be that visible. I did sand this edge right here because this will be a little bit exposed, and when I oil, I will be oiling underneath, which will get this part, but the rest of this won't be. And the other thing that's weird about this piece is that it's not flush, which could cause some problem with gluing in this corner, but I'll do the best I can. So, again, water. You want to spray where the glue is going to go. A lot of water there. It gets soaked right into this wood, it's so dry. And then I need to take the Gorilla Glue. If I can get it open with one hand, which I can't. Oh, wait, maybe. Okay, got it open. It looks like this. There's not much left in this bottle, but there's enough. And I'll start by putting the glue on the wood here. And I just put kind of a generous bead along here. And then like a zigzaggy bead over here. I don't want to put too much because it will expand a little bit, and I don't want it getting on my wall. Not that it's a huge deal. I have to touch everything up anyway. So that's done, and then do the same thing here. This is where it's going to be tricky because this is going to go against the edge, the back edge, but then over here it drops off, so I'm not even sure if this will make contact over here, but still I'll put some glue on it. And then over here, I don't know if my camera's on there. That's it. Actually, I went a little too far. Okay, so now it's ready to get put into place, and I'm going to put it in place and then wedge some wood to hold it down. And I need 2 hands for that, so I'm shutting off the camera. Okay, so I've put this in place. I haven't wedged it down yet. I want to point out that I have to press it back as far as I can. Okay, and then as you can see, it's not a perfect cut. This would be impossible to cut perfectly. So there are some gaps in a few places, but I want to get it as tight against the back of the window as I can, and now it's ready to wedge into place. I'm using this piece of wood, which is actually one of my original windowsills, so it's cut to about the right size. I'm using this against the top of the window frame, and those washcloth rags are sitting on top of it just to protect the drywall on the top. So this will go against the ceiling of the windowsill, and then I've got these blocks here, little 2x4 segments, also with rags, and they'll go at the bottom. And then I've got these posts. They're cut out approximately the right size. There's 3 of them, 1 in the middle, 1 on either side, and that'll wedge it into place. So let's do that. Okay, so I have put in the braces. You can see them here. What was interesting, 2 things. First of all, this window was narrower than the other one, so I had to run downstairs and cut this piece of wood, cut the end off so I could put it in there. It doesn't need to fit perfectly, it just needs to be able to get in there. And then second of all, either the windowsill isn't as thick, maybe I over sanded it, or the opening is taller, but the sticks weren't long enough. So I added some rags on the top of these to brace, to tighten them up. It has to really push down hard to push the bottom down. I can't take credit for this setup with the braces. This was all Don's idea, and I'm just using the parts that he gave me to keep repeating it. So now this is in place. It's glued down. The glue will react with the water, expand, get all bubbly like it does, and make a nice tight seal. And I need to let it sit. He says overnight, but I should be able to take this off tonight if I wanted to. For example, if I finished another windowsill and I wanted to glue that one later this afternoon, I could take all this apart maybe around 6 o'clock and use it on the other one. So that's the wood being glued into place. And the benefit of this setup is that it's going to be nice and firm and steady, and there's no nail holes or dowel holes or anything like that to worry about. So it's all good. Okay, I'm back to work on this windowsill. After putting it in and wedging it into place, gluing it on the bottom, let it sit for about 24 hours. And then I took the wedges off and got it ready to go. So the next step was to surround the area with masking tape. And that's so that when I use the oil on it, I don't get oil on the wall and also on the window frame. So I surrounded it. And then the final step before I'm ready to start oiling it, actually there's 2 more steps. The first one was to take the 120 grit sandpaper on my orbital sander, which I've got attached to a vacuum cleaner to reduce the dust, and give it 1 more going over, which I just did. And then the very final step is to take a damp rag and I'll wipe it down and let it dry, and that'll get all the remaining dust off of it. I'll probably wind up closing the windows. I have 3 of them to do the oil on. This window's closed. The other 2, the windows are open. I want to make sure that I minimize the amount of road dust and just dust in the area that comes in. So next step is to put the sander away, wipe it down with a damp cloth, and then I can start oiling it once it's dried off. This isn't the windowsill I've been working on throughout these videos. This is another one, but it shows an example of why I give it 1 more sanding before I oil it. And if you could see here, these little spots, these are little nicks. I don't know how they got in there. It could have been something I missed when I originally sanded it downstairs, or it could have been something that was introduced when I was putting it into position up here. In any case, I didn't even see these. I did sand this again. I didn't even see these until I wiped it down with the wet cloth. You can see that the wood is a little bit darker in that area. That's because it's wet. So what I'll be doing here is letting it dry, and then I'll take the sander back to that to get rid of those little spots. Because if I leave them there, chances are they'll really show up when I oil it down, so I don't want that to happen. Okay, I am about to oil the windowsill I've been showing all along. I've got the camera on a tripod so I can use my hands. What I'm going to be using is this tung oil finish. Minwax is the brand. It doesn't have to be Minwax. My friend Don uses a different brand, Glossy. This one doesn't say if it's glossy or not. It comes kind of shiny. And what I've done is I saved these yogurt containers just for this kind of purpose, and then I'm just going to put some in here. I've got 3 windowsills to do. I want the first coat. I'll be giving them a total of 4 coats. So I put a bunch in there. I'm going to close it up, get it out of the way. And then what I apply it with, they tell you to use a paintbrush or something like that. I use pieces of sponge. And these are cheap, junky sponges, and I buy light colors so I don't have to worry about the color getting mixed in. And then the last thing I need to do, if I turn it over, is to put on a glove. Because I don't want this junk on my hands. So I've got these rubber gloves, single use. There they are. And then what I just do is I dip the sponge in, and then I rub it on. And you'll see the change in color is immediate if I get enough oil in there. When you first start using the sponge, you really got to get the oil in. And then I just rub it in. And my first coat is always really, really thick and really, really thorough, and I rub it in really good. And it really brings out the grain. I don't know if you could see that. And then I'll just do the entire exposed piece, including the top, which is the most important, the front edges, and then along the bottom of the front side. And I've got 3 windowsills to do this morning, and I'll do those before I get on with my other work during the day. I'll let them dry all day long, and then I'll give them another coat before I go to bed tonight. Total of 4 coats. It'll probably be over 2 days. And that's what I'm doing. Okay, so this is the windowsill right after I've given it its first coat of tung oil. I think it looks pretty good. I've got 3 more coats to go. Okay, this is the windowsill I've been working on. It's got 4 coats of tung oil on it. It's completely done. I removed the tape around it and I repositioned some of the tape. I'm going to be using some caulk to fill in this teeny tiny crack between the windowsill and the wall. And then also while I'm doing that, I'm going to be closing up the crack here between the window and the wall, which the drywall guys failed to do. So I'll be doing that on both sides. I don't think I need to do it against the back of the window, but I do need to do the sides and up the sides of the window, and probably across the top of the window. So I'm going to apply a bead of caulk, and then I've got a little tool which looks like this, and that tool will go in the crack and smooth it out. It works really well. I've used it on some other windows, and I'll do the same thing over here. It's white caulk. It's called painter's caulk, and it can be painted after the fact, and that will enable me to put a nice finish on this. And I have to do all the windows. And that's it. Okay, I have used the caulk to get into the cracks. You can kind of see it here. And I also did the edges of the window that needed it. The bottom didn't need it here. So what you might see is the white caulk that I put on, just kind of blending into the greenish wall color. It's actually called, I think it's called rye bread, but it looks green to me. Anyway, the white against it, it needs to be painted. So that's my next step, but I need to wait for this caulk to dry. But it looks a lot better now that it's filled in, that the cracks are gone. So that's the next step, is to finish it up with some paint, maybe later. So here's one last video showing what the finished windowsill looks like, fully installed. The process was cutting it out, then finishing up the edges, sanding it down, putting it into place, applying some tung oil, 4 coats of it, and finishing up around the edges. And I really think it looks great. I've got 8 windowsills in this room, look pretty much the same way. And I'm loving it, worth every bit of effort.